We all have companions that help us on our whisky journey. Tonight, I'd like to celebrate one of mine. We all have. Hello, whiskey folk. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another vPub. Welcome to another Thursday night. Hope you're all doing very, very well. Wonderful to see fantastic support again on this Thursday night as winter's drawing in. Well over 100 of you, knocking on for 150, waiting impatiently for me to get started. I've got a friend waiting in the background tonight, and I want to celebrate a friend and companion tonight as well. We all have these kind of solid, reliable friends in our lives, the ones that are just always kind of there. And you come to rely on them perhaps a wee bit more than you sometimes recognize, maybe even a wee bit more than you would sometimes care to admit. In recent vPubs, anybody that's been watching me for long enough will know that I talk about this companion a lot, and I celebrate the fact that I have relied heavily on that companion for a long, long time now. It's inspired me. I use it as a sounding board, as a fact checker. I use it for inspiration. I use it for just so many things. And of course, the companion, the friend I'm talking about, is the Malt Whisky Yearbook. I've been buying this book for years now. I buy multiple copies. I gift it to people. It's one of these things that if anybody shows any kind of interest in whiskey, to me, that they're serious about it, the first book I give them put in their hands to help them navigate their way through the landscape is this book. I think it's fantastic, and everybody that I've recommended it to has loved it as well. It's very, very successful. It's looked forward to, anticipated every year, and the brand new 2021 release has just come out in October. I met the editor, creator, and author of the Malt Whisky Yearbook a couple of years back at a festival. And I remember the discussion at the time just being very comfortable and very easy. And I remember having this wee idea that if I could build the vPub up to be something big enough so as not to waste anyone's time, this is the kind of guy I'd like to invite on and hang out with one night. And that's happening tonight, and I'm very much looking forward to introducing Ingvar to you guys too. First, I'm going to jump into the chat and welcome some of you beautiful whiskey folk and dedicated barflies. So good to see so many of you in. Who do we have tonight? Mike Maruzzi is in. Good to see you, Mike. Always good to welcome you. And he's saying good morning, evening, and all the barflies from Melbourne, Australia. So you're a full 12 or maybe even 13 hours behind us, my friend. I'll raise a glass to you as you raise your cup of tea or coffee or whatever, but it's nice to welcome you in, Mike. Fantastic. Simon Ray from Nottingham is in as well. Good to see you, Simon. Robert Fredrickson, multi-mission in Belgium. Good to see you, Menno. How are you doing? Jimmy Jazz, Jim Jensen, just won a wee dram from me recently. Well done, Jimmy. It's on its way to you, my friend. I hope you enjoy it. Bartot's feedback. I know I've made an absolute mess of your name, my friend. It's the first time I've given you a shout out, but I realised that you've just joined the Barflies tonight, and thank you very much for your support. Nice to welcome you in. My friend, also from down south, Southern Hemisphere, Peter Eichen from Australia as well as in. Good to see you too, Peter. David Owen is here. Mrs. Swift, I think that's Andrea. Good to have you, Andrea. Wonderful to welcome you in. She's saying, looking sharp, Roy. Thank you very much. Lee J. Brown is here. Ebhead, my friend Rolf in Norway is in. Rolf, that was a fantastic picture that you shared in the Aquavitae Barflies group tonight. If you don't mind, I'd like to share that maybe closer to the end of the stream tonight. I thought it was a great picture. I loved it. Greg's Whiskey Guide is in from France. Good to see you, my friend. Daniel Vermas is in. Radek, Frank Peathead, Tabitha Mills. That looks like a new name, Tabitha. Wonderful to welcome you in here. Gareth Thomason is in. Good to have you, Gareth. David Evans, Drew from Arizona, Mark Slinger. Time for a Dram, Gregor. That's it, the new name, the new alias for our friend out in Oregon, Gregor McQuee. Good to see it, and I'm glad you've kept the same icon, Gregor, and then I can recognise who you are. Chris, Leanne, Scotch on the Bayou, Luna Aaron, Paul Ellis, so many of you in. It's going to be difficult for me to keep up. Stu, babysitting evening. Roy, nice to have you back. Hope you enjoyed your break. Yes, I apologise. Last week I wasn't here. I did miss you all. I did miss it. I ended up using the Thursday night late on Thursday night to do a patron-only lock-in instead. But that's a good sign. If I'm missing the vPub, if I'm missing you guys, it means I'm enjoying it. But the week on Islay was superb. It wasn't a whiskey trip, although there were just kind of incidental distilleries everywhere you went. Of course, it was the island of Islay. There are 9 there now. And I got to see all the distilleries. I didn't go inside them all. It was not a whiskey trip, but it was a family trip. And I'm very glad to see that all the family loved, even adored Islay. And I fully predict that it will not be the last time I take a family break to that wee magical island. Wonderful to welcome you all. If you're trying to get my attention tonight, of course, use Aquavitae. Just type Aquavitae with the V, of course, or at Aquavitae. I know it's trickier on a mobile device, but even now, if you just type Aquavitae, I should see it quite clearly. There's also another member joined that I seem to have missed. I hope I can catch it in time. John Bell. Welcome, John. Welcome to the Barflies community. Nice to have you supporting. Thank you so much. There's a couple of wee things I want to mention at the head of the stream, and one of them is a little bit sad news, actually. I talked about it on the lock-in when I went live from Islay last week, but I want to put our thoughts across the Atlantic for a wee while to our friend Dwayne. Dwayne Large, he's been a member of this channel, this community, this support. He's just a fantastic guy. I've met him multiple times on his visits to Scotland. Really wonderful guy, and fell ill really quite recently and really quite suddenly. He's got a path to recovery ahead of him, but it's looking like it's going to be quite a long path, and it's going to be quite difficult for him. He's finding communication quite difficult and things. I've been communicating. I reached out to his sister just to kind of give our thoughts and best wishes, and to tell her just how much everybody's asking after Dwayne. She replied and she said that he's very, very appreciative and he's very much enjoying hearing that people are thinking about him. I want everybody to just have a wee thought about Dwayne, and if there's anything that you do want to get across to Dwayne, not in the live chat, not in here, but maybe in the comments section under the video afterwards, leave a wee message for Dwayne, and I'll share the link with Dwayne's sister, so that we can get some of those messages sent across. And I may even try to collate these messages and these good wishes and get it across to our friend. Sir Dwayne, as you're over there in the States, I'm not sure what challenges you're facing right now, my friend, but let me tell you that we're all very, very much thinking about you, and I'll raise this glass to my friend Dwayne in the States. Very best wishes, Sláinte, my friend. I hope he's back on his feet soon. Greg is saying, sorry about that, Roy. Please give him her support. Where is he located? Dwayne is in Indiana in the US. Also, I want to mention, on a more positive note, this whiskey season, isn't it? Everything's happening. And throughout 2020, what 2020 has done for us, it seems, is it's really forced a lot of focus onto virtual arrangements, virtual tastings, virtual events. And I think we should all kind of think about that for a wee while and make the most of it. Because even when we come back to some form of new normal in the future, I know we don't talk about the pandemic and we don't say the C word on the vPub. It's our kind of escapist pocket of time away from all of that. But at some point in the future, when we do reach a new normal and we do get back into the same spaces together again, I would like to see the virtual thing continue, because there's no reason why one replaces the other. It's very much an enhancement. It's easy for it to be a hybrid thing. The wonderful thing about the virtual arrangement is that it can reach people that don't have access to the city centre clubs, to the big event spaces for festivals. It doesn't matter where they're located, as long as they've got an internet connection, they can hook up virtually. And I would like to see a lot more of that continuing. Over the next few weeks, I'm involved in a few. I'm looking forward to the Kilkerran tasting that's coming up. There's a Ralphie versus North Star coming up. I think that's in collaboration with the Good Spirits Company. There's a Springbank tasting as well. I think they both land in the same night, which is going to be difficult. There's a London Whisky Club tastings as well. You'll see me joining for the Sullivan's Cove London Whisky Club tasting on the 11th of November. The reason that's exciting is we really don't ever get much Sullivan's Cove actually available here. So it's going to be quite exciting to try those whiskies. So I'm hoping that I get to bump into some of you on some of these virtual tastings in the coming weeks and months ahead. That could be fun. Lindsay Holman is saying, here, Aquavite. It was good to hear Belfast Whisky Festival announced their virtual aspect would be maintained for 2021. Fantastic. Belfast Whisky Festival went tremendously well. Fantastic feedback about that. Great feedback about the English Whisky Festival. Wonderful, amazing feedback about the event that the Whisky Show put on for their virtual event to replace their live event this year. The content is vast for that festival. If you had a ticket to that, the content is still available online and it's amazing. Really just amazing content that these things are able to put out there. And the other advantage about it as well, where it's different from a real live event, most of these events are available afterwards as well, so that you're able to tune in for a second run at a slower pace, or let's say relive the moment. And certainly they should be. If they are not, it's a very, very good advantage to have. Wonderful stuff. Regan Haddix is in saying, evening Aquavite and Barflies. Good to see you, my friend. Theo Birch is here saying, I'm happy you're a good week away. I'm heading to Islay on Saturday for the week. Which distilleries are open? You're going to find that all the distilleries are in some form of restriction or lockdown. Most of the visitor centres are open with the exception of Bruichladdich and Colilla. I didn't go into Ardbeg or Laphroaig or Bowmore, but I went into Lagavulin. I stopped by, we ate at Ardnahoe. The food at Ardnahoe was fantastic. If you book, they're open, socially distanced, lots of space. I recommend Ardnahoe. Bunnahabhain Visitor Centre was open, and Bunnahabhain is just a wonderful spot to go to anytime. Bruichladdich is closed, unfortunately. Kilchoman, I think, was open. I only did a drive-by at Kilchoman. I'm sure their cafe will not be, but I think their visitor centre was. So there is some form of whiskey for you there, my friend, but unfortunately it's not what you would come to expect normally, and there are no tours or guided events on or anything. Matt Bishop is in. That's Whiskey Games. He's saying, just put the paddleboard away for another year. I hope you joined the kids in the water, Matt. I hope you didn't blouse it out. I did step into the cold water ever so briefly with my children, but it was freezing out on the Atlantic. It really was. Alistair McPhail is saying, in no Addis Ababa Whisky Festival. Okay, Alistair, he's saying that should be my objective for next year. I've done SMWS and other virtual tastings from here, but it's not the same. It is amazing, but you're no different from anybody else in 2020, Alistair. We've all been starved of that communal space. Neil Laverty is saying, did you see many otters? Neil, and thank you, my friend, for your recent support. Thank you very much for joining inside Patreon. I caught the message just before we went live tonight. Your name will appear in the credits at the end. I managed to get the end sequence modified before I went live. Otters, we were seeking. My 9-year-old son is otter crazy. So we went. I'll tell you a funny story. It was wonderful. We went everywhere in Islay looking for otters, and I think they were very elusive. Maybe they were looking at us, but we couldn't see them. But I went into a shop and asked for some binoculars to help us find these otters. And all the cheaper, let's say, binoculars had been sold. And I said, do you have any binoculars? And the lady said, yes, we have, but you'll not be wanting them. Obviously, I knew immediately that they were going to be expensive. So I said, okay. And I started to talk to her about the otters. I said, we're looking for otters for my son. And she said, oh, yes, there's millions of otters all around Islay, millions of them. And I said, well, where would you recommend that I can go? And some of the places I already recognized as previous tips, but she gave me a few other fantastic spots to go looking for otters. And then I asked her, where did you see your otters? And she said, I've lived on Islay all my life and I've never seen an otter. It was so funny. The two of us just standing in the shop was laughing about it and trying to keep this information away from my son, who was really, really hopeful that he'd catch one. I'm sure we will catch an otter, but it just means that we need to go back to Islay at some point in the future again. Kevin Bryant is saying, evening, Roy, sipping on a Glengarry 15 a right sherry bomb. I know that Glengarry 15, thanks to Macallan Fine and Rare, the dock, and that is an absolute peach of a Glengarry. I love it very, very much. Cheers to you. Cheers to everyone. Welcome to the vPub. So to maximise my time with the guest, I'm just going to reach out to Ingvar and bring him in. And I'm going to bring him in by sharing a wee story. And it's the story of how I met him a couple of years ago. I was running late for a masterclass and I got ushered in. It was before I was on time. I didn't keep anyone late, but I was one of the last people to be shown into the room. And I came into the room carrying a dram with me. And I got sat next to Ingvar in this masterclass that was hosted by Sukhinder Singh. This was at the Old and Rare show in 2018. And I sat next to Ingvar and I spotted and recognized him immediately. And I was quite pleased to be sat next to him. And then I was further encouraged by the fact that he turned out to be really quite open and chatty and an absolute pleasure to sit next to. But he did spot me bringing a dram into the masterclass, and he pointed at it and he said, "Why have you brought a whiskey into a masterclass when you have 6 or 7 whiskies here laid out in front of you?" Now, realizing that that's probably not the protocol, I apologized and said, "Yes, you're right. I probably shouldn't have done that. I was running late. It was poured for me just before I came in. But I don't want to rush this. This is a 1905 bottling of a 21-year-old blended malt. It was distilled in 1884, and it's fabulous and still fresh and tropical, and I really don't want to rush it." And Ingvar looked at me and he said, "Oh, do you mind?" And I was happy to pass the glass over to him to let him have a wee nose, and I did encourage him to have a wee taste as well. And that's how I got chatting to Ingvar Ronde, and I realised that he was going to be a great guy to get involved in the vPub. And I'll reach out to Ingvar now to welcome in and say, "Ingvar, my friend, welcome to the vPub."
Thank you, Roy. Thank you.
Do you remember that story I've just recalled?
I do remember we sat next to each other in Glasgow at the Old and Rare. I managed to forget about me being so cheeky and reaching for the glass and wanting to try your 1884 blend. I mean, that was terrible. But
no, yeah. That's at my encouragement. That's at my encouragement, no doubt. I think what you probably wanted was just to have a quick nose, just to kind of just because it's a 19th century whiskey. Wow, it's amazing, right? And I think at my encouragement, I encouraged you to have a wee sip as well. But I remember talking to you about the book. I remember talking about the trials and tribulations of that book. I remember me trying to get across to you during that session how much I valued your work in that book. And I remembered very much enjoying the chat together. But it's an absolute pleasure for me to be able to bring that to everyone else as well and welcome you on. Because I know this has been a particularly challenging and busy month for you, hasn't it?
It has. I mean, every year around 1st of October, the new edition of the Malt Whisky Yearbook is launched. This year was really challenging. And I think I mentioned that in the foreword of the book, because I started whining about how difficult it was to no travels. I couldn't go to any distillery. All the people at the distilleries in Scotland were furloughed. I had to struggle for months to get some answers to my questions. Then I realized, Ingvar, for God's sake, stop whining. I mean, there are terrible things happening in the world. People are dying. The economy is going down everywhere, not just in the whiskey business. So, I mean, I had to realize that these problems were not that big. But okay, it was a bit more challenging.
I have to say, your introduction says that exactly. You talk about the challenges, but then you do make note of the fact that people are in and have lost loved ones and have been in much more dire situations.
The perspective of things, yeah, absolutely.
I didn't read the introduction as whiny at all.
Okay, thanks.
I am amazed as I flick through the book. I've not read it fully yet. I've read a couple articles. I obviously devoured Charlie McLean's article like I always do. I read a couple of others about the whiskies that broke the mold. I enjoyed that. But this is a book that brings out articles that you go back to time and time again. It's most of the articles in this book, you can go back to 2011, 2010,
Mm.
And there's so many of them are evergreen. And even the ones that are not evergreen, it's still wonderful to have that contrast, that snapshot of time, the perspectives of that year, the year that was in whiskey. I realized that on your website, you can go back as far, I think, as 2009 and still buy a copy.
You can buy copies from 2008 and forward.
On the website. Okay.
The first two are gone. 2006 to 2007, they're gone.
Yes, that's auction fodder now, probably, right?
I know.
So let me ask you. I've got a few questions here. I've got questions from the community, of course. Lots of fantastic questions come in from them. But I'll start with a couple of my questions. Actually, will be able to cover a lot of this these queries from the community, and that is the three obvious things. I'll just get them out the way in one big clump, and that can start our discussion if you're open to that. And that is, number one, who is Ingvar Ronde, and how did Ingvar Ronde discover malt whiskey? How did he discover that he could have a passion for malt whiskey? And then how did that love of malt whiskey inspire what is an undertaking that's clearly a labour of love? And let me tell you, I can only half imagine the effort that goes into this. So those three steps: who is Ingvar Ronde? What's your background? How did you get into whiskey? And how did that inspire the yearbook? Is that loaded?
First of all, I'm from Sweden, which tends to surprise a lot of people that it's a Swede who is doing the Malt Whisky Yearbook. But I mean, for God's sake, the world of whiskey is global, so why not? I'm 63 years old. I've been working in a lot of different areas during the years. Most people don't know that I even had a radio show in the early 80s with dance band music, English and American from the 20s and 30s. You didn't know that, Roy. I can see that.
I did know that.
No. So,
I've been doing my reading.
Okay.
I was surprised at the discovery, though.
Yeah. So anyway, I've been working in publishing for a lot of years. And I traveled to Scotland for the first time in 1980. I took the train from London up to Inverness, rented a car together with a friend, and we headed onto the Whiskey Trail, which, I mean, at that time, there weren't that many distilleries open to visitors. So we went to Glenfiddich, Glenlivet, Strathila, and I think it was Glenfarclas.
Yes. Yep.
And I hadn't bought a single malt before that. I had tried a couple of single malts before that. I think my first introduction to whiskey was Johnny Walker Red, probably. Most kids at my age, early 20s, that was Johnny Walker Red. Anyway, I bought a Dufftown Glenlivet in London and brought it on the train. So that was a second week in July in 1980. So that was the first single malt I bought. So we traveled around these distilleries, and I got immediately hooked. Started enjoying malt whiskey, loved it. So if we go forward quite quickly, so around 2004, I realized I wanted to do something else in my working life. I had been an owner of a chain of retail stores selling outdoor equipment for 10 years. I loved that, but I sold the company. And in 2004, I thought, I love this whiskey thing, and I want to know more about it. I want to keep up with all the happenings in the whiskey world. But where do you get the information? I can get it from the internet, but I wasn't sure who to rely on. And there was no, I mean, there were books, for God's sake. I mean, in 1988, I bought my first copy of Michael Jackson's Malt Whisky Companion. But that got outdated sooner or later. So I realized if there was a yearbook about whiskey, that would have been fantastic. And there were yearbooks about everything, about dogs, about weapon, cars, everything, nothing about whiskey. So I realized with my experience in publishing and my interest in whiskey, why couldn't I do that? So I mean, it was first and foremost, it was to satisfy my own need for something updated every year. So I published the first Malt Whisky Yearbook in 2005. In the autumn, I printed 10,000 copies. I'm really optimistic. I sold 3,000. So I was sitting there with 7,000 copies that I didn't sell. And I was thinking, was this a good idea, really? But actually, it took off quite rapidly. So in year 3 or 4, I still printed 10,000 copies, and I sold them all. So I continued, and today every year I print around 16,000 copies, and it sells. So obviously there was a need. It wasn't just me. There was a need for, and actually in the start I was thinking of doing a whiskey yearbook about blends, about bourbon, about everything, but I realized that was too large a task to do. So I settled for malt whiskey.
And was that an easy decision for you to make because you were your passion, your first love, let's say, was probably centered around malt, or?
Yeah, absolutely. I realized that to make it comprehensible, I had to choose something, and malt whiskey was my interest. So obviously, yeah.
I try to be as open-minded as I possibly can. I try all whiskies. I love all whiskies. I enjoy them all. I love bourbon. I love world whiskies. I love grain. I love finding a really nice blend. But honestly, sometimes you just have to. And I think I confessed it was a recent vPub. Maybe it was a patron lock, and I don't know. But I just out and said, look, actually, what I really love is malt whiskey. I just love barley. I just love what barley gives us in that glass. But it turned out to be quite a nice mechanic for you to help control this book, I think, because there are a number of questions that's been collected from the community that is so much to do with the size of this book and the content and how succinct and focused it is. Now, of course, you've mentioned that a huge part of that is the fact that you're focusing on malt, so that's clear. But so many of them are asking. Alan McLaughlin asks a question about the growth of the industry, the growth of capacity, the growth of distilleries, the innovation, the growth of core ranges. Young talks similar. Frank, Petehead Frank asks a similar question as well, talking about how he talks about, next to those questions, I'm curious where he gets his facts that I so miraculously turn into, he's calling an asshat question. You'll understand a bit later what an asshat question is, but your book is fundamental in putting together the quizzes and so much of the content on this channel. I'll talk about that at length a bit later. And he's talking, then he goes on, how does he keep up with the changes? And how do you manage to keep it in this format year after year? This is not representative of what's happened in whiskey in 15 years, because this is the same size virtually as the 2006 book. Am I right?
Yeah, brilliant questions. And I remember in 2005, the chapter about distilleries around the world, I think it was about 12 pages. I think I had 40 or so distilleries, and now I think I have around 500 or something. So, yeah, I mean, in order not to make a book that grows to 500 pages every year, and which will become expensive to print, expensive to buy, expensive to ship, you need to focus on certain things. And the most problematic chapter has definitely been the world distilleries. So I decided a few years ago that I will focus, for each and every country, I will focus on a few distilleries that are the most interesting in terms of how they produce the whiskey, how available the whiskies are, how large they are, what kind of impact they have on the industry, and give them more space. And then for the other distilleries, they should always be mentioned, but maybe just 2 or 3 sentences, and then people can search for more information on their websites. And that's a necessity. Otherwise, that book that you hold in your hand, that would be 600, 700, 800 pages. That's impossible to do and impossible to sell.
I understand this, and I know that can be a challenge, because to complicate is simple, to simplify is complicated, right? Yeah. So I think you face a challenge in keeping that succinct nature. You're talking about the double spread here for Bramore, that gets 2 pages, obviously because of the impact, and then we've got Bray Val or Braes of Glenlivet over the page here, still getting a full page, but exactly backing up what you're talking about there. And for most of the established Scotch malt distilleries, we get that full page. I've got a quick question for you. This is just a quick.
Yep.
When do the new distilleries get promoted to the established distilleries? Because that's a challenge for you as well, I'm sure.
It is a challenge. I got that question earlier this summer by the guys at Wolfburn. And and they asked me, so when are we being transferred to the main chapter of the Scottish distilleries and not just one of the new guys? We've been launching whiskies now for 5 or 6 years. That is a problem, because if I should invite all the new distilleries as soon as they have released a whiskey and give them 1 page each, okay, then we would grow the book into 500-600 pages easily. I mean, since the year 2000, we have 34 new Scottish distilleries. Within the next 2 or 3 years, we will have 10 or 12 more. So early on, I decided that the distilleries that were producing before the year 2000 would be given 1 page each or 2 pages. So you could ask the question, and it's a valid question, why does Inchgower, why does that receive 1 page every year? Nothing happens at Inchgower. Inchgower produces beautiful malt, I love it, but it's mainly for bells.
Yes.
But then we have the independent bottlers. So a lot of my readers, they will discover Inchgower many times a year through either the Scotch Malt Whisky Society or other independent bottlers. So they have an interest in reading about Inchgower. And even though it doesn't happen that much at the distillery every year, I can always tweak it. I can find a new angle about the history, about how they produce the whiskey. So there's always new material about Inchgower. So that's the reason why I stick to this format. And I will do for at least another couple of years. But I realize it's difficult. We have Daffmill, for instance. They've been around for so many years. And 2 years ago, Francis, he released his first whiskies, and they are amazing. And Francis is one of the guys who said, why don't I get a page? I love him. He's a fantastic man. He does fantastic whiskey. So I have to think about that. And I will think about it for a couple of years now.
If I can throw my own very, very enthusiast hat into the ring here, for me, there are 2 sides of the coin from my perspective. I think one of the wonderful things is that it has stayed this size over the years. It looks lovely in a little collection, a little stack over here, year by year. They all fit the theme. The aesthetics has stayed the same, certainly on the outside, and with very little modifications on the inside. It's nice, it's reassuring and consistent. And what is good about that, it's a yearbook. It's not like Michael Jackson's Companion from 1988. This builds almost encyclopedically to give you more information that's updated year after year. Inchgower, we can go back a few years and learn something different. So it's arguable that by keeping it at this size, we're kind of building that library almost. But let me tell you how I actually feel. I would pay the extra money for shipping, for printing, to cost to buy this if you expanded the size of this book. There is space in my hand, in my palm, in my grip. There is space in an envelope, and there's certainly space in my bookshelf to have more of this every year. But I understand that that's not everybody's opinion. That's somebody who's very, very much invested already inside it.
Yeah. So let me ask you, Roy. I mean, today the Malt Whisky Yearbook is $14.95. How much would you be willing to pay for a yearbook which is expanded by another 200-300 pages?
The yearbook has cost me a minimum of £60 every year that I've been buying it, because that's how many copies I buy. I'm not kidding. There's a chance that two could be here, just to back up. I have two just here. Now, I thumb these, I use these, I make notes in these, but what will happen is that somebody will be talking to me and I'll gift them this. There are people in the chat tonight, there are people that watch this show that have received this book from me just because I believe that it will help them in a similar way it's helped me, because we're not just talking about nice history and nice information about the size of the mash tun and the how many fermentation vessels they have. We're speaking about giving an idea of scale and geography, an idea of the parts of all these distilleries play in this kind of really quite complex puzzle of malt over the last couple or 300 years that we have. This book gives you really, really quite insightful information towards that. And you consume it without realizing it. It's like a subconscious thing as you go through and read it. You're starting to understand all of those dynamics as you do it. And it's got the wonderful kind of feeling of a reference guide, a dip in and out. It's not a book you read from start to finish. You just open it and read, and then open it a completely random page and read. From my perspective, I wouldn't like to talk the price up out of hand, but I think honestly at £15, there's nothing to talk about. I suggest to anyone that this book, you should, before you buy another bottle of whiskey, you should be buying this book if you don't already own it. And I don't think I would get anybody in the lounge tonight criticizing me for those claims. I have relied so heavily, when I talk about this book being a friend and a companion, everybody that's been watching me for as long as this channel's been going know that that's true. The quiz at the end exists. At least 50% of the questions will be discovered in this book. At least 50%. Some of the topics or the things, the thoughts that this book puts in my head ends up being content that I create. So £15 to me, from my perspective, is like I say, it's nothing to talk about. £20, £25.
I love to hear your comments, but I managed to read one of the comments here at the right, and it said, less money on books, more on whiskey. I love that.
Well, what about, I would counter that, and I know that we're being teased. There's Helen is saying more than worth £25 a book. And Greg and Francis saying, I offer these books myself too. Indeed, a great gift idea, Roy. So I would counter that comment by saying, this book helps you determine your next purchase of whiskey. It's not a review. You're not going to get scores in this. You're going to get the minimum of tasting notes. It doesn't come in at that angle, but it does inspire and it does take you in directions, and it does make you seek out whiskies that perhaps, and styles that perhaps you haven't happened upon before. And I think that that in itself is, there's a huge value there.
I've been thinking about who the book is for, actually, because I have a lot of people telling me that this is the whiskey book that I recommend a person coming into the whiskey world. And usually my comment on that is, don't recommend that book to a person that just have entered their path into the whiskey world. Because if I should be honest, it is a bit geeky. It is a bit nerdy. It is for one who have been in the whiskey world for a year or two to get a deeper knowledge. But if you just say, I would like to know something more about whiskey, to be honest, there are other books.
Well, I think that if somebody had their first bottle, first glass, just in their first moments of enjoying their whiskey journey, if they opened this, it would seem like they're at the base of a very steep mountain, perhaps, because of the variation, because of the amount of distilleries that there are in here. Because in Scotland we're already at 100 and knocking on for 130 distilleries in here. More will be added, and then the world malt distilleries as well just blows that even further. I understand that, but it is pitched to somebody who is already at some level of enthusiast. They can be a casual enthusiast. They don't need to be
absolutely, but not for a beginner. Not for a beginner, because that could be intimidating to find all these 665 distilleries. Where the hell should I start? Give me some clues.
Well, the people I would gift it to would be, for example, my cousin Kevin. And he ended up working in whiskey and retail, whiskey retail. He started a YouTube channel. He's now gone off to work with the police force, but he started to a career in whiskey based on the passion that he picked up that malt whiskey gave him. And when he started, he'd been round here many times tasting, and he started to buy his own bottles and have his own little collection building at home. And at that point, I gifted him the book, because at that point, I think he's bitten, he's interested, and he's going to want to. He doesn't have me here around a dining table with drams lined up all the time. He's going to need to be able to dip in. And like you say, you can search the internet and things, but that's almost as intimidating. Here you've got a place where it's concise, concentrated, tells you what you need to know, tells you where you need to go to get more of it. You even dedicate a page in here of websites to watch, and you list all the other places, in the spirit of fantastic collaboration, I have to say, of where people can go to find more information out there. So again, you're helping people.
Well, what actually surprised me after a few years is that the industry itself, they started buying the book for their employees, for brand ambassadors, for tour guides, for their customers, and that was I didn't see that coming. I thought this was a consumer book for all us whiskey enthusiasts, but when the industry started taking interest in the book, that surprised me, and that kept going. So a lot of the big producers, they buy the book every year for the people working for them.
That's got to feel good.
Yeah, that's good. That's nice. Yeah.
Helen is saying that there's not much space on our bookshelves, too many bottles of whiskey, but that's the same person that just said that it would be worth £25. Now, I'm not talking up the price of this that we have. I'm talking up the price of, I would pay more. I would pay more, but I would pay more for, if we saw that being a necessity because of the size, the work that was going in. But there must also be an argument, Ingvar, that if that became a 500-600 page publication, maybe it couldn't be a solo project steered by you yourself, right?
Yeah, you're right. And I realize that already now I am missing quite a few distilleries around the world opening up. It is difficult to keep track, especially in Asia. I just found out about malt whiskey distillery in Korea that opened up in July. And I got the information a week ago. So that didn't make it into this year's yearbook. So it is difficult to keep track. I would never claim that I have all the malt whiskey distilleries in the world in the book. I would never do that, because I know very well that, especially in the USA and Australia, there are so many distilleries opening up now. So I can't keep track of them all.
Unless they hear about the book.
Absolutely.
And they come to you, right?
And that was the case with this Korean distillery. That was Andrew Shand, who used to be distillery manager at Speyside Distillery. And he went over to the States, to the Virginia distillery, and left there and went to Korea. And now he opened up a distillery there. So old contacts come back to me and say, hey, Ingvar, it's been a long time. Did you know that we're opening up a distillery here in Korea? So that's fantastic with all these contacts made.
absolutely. I've just had a cheeky request in from Peter Wilcox asking if I've finished with my backup copy of the 2020 yearbook. Peter, I've already written to Peter. Hope you enjoy the book, Slancher. I'm going to put this to the side. It'll go in a jiffy bag tomorrow. I hope I've got your address, Peter, but if I don't already, it's making its way out to you. Now that I've got this book also signed by Ingvar, it means that I can happily pass that on to you. Also, Ingvar was good enough to send over a couple of books for us to give away as well. 2 books are going to patrons, and I've also got 2 books to give away publicly here this evening. And the great thing about these are that all of these are also signed to a fellow barfly. May the malt be with you, Slancher. Thank you so much for these, Ingvar. That was a really wonderful gesture. I think what I'd like to do is we'll give one away now and then one away a wee bit later in the stream. How does that sound? Okay. Yep. All I'll say is that anybody that wants to try for one of these, if you have one of these already or you have one on its way, you can still try and win it. But if you win it in the spirit of what we're talking about, maybe give it to somebody else in the lounge. Maybe gift it to another barfly. If you're struggling to find out their address or whatever, you can work through me. But everybody's welcome to try and get their hands on this signed copy. But if you do get it, the other copy that you have on hand, maybe gift it to somebody else in the lounge. I think that would be a nice gesture. I did ask you in advance, and I'll come up with a question as well. Did you come up with any kind of question that we can ask the lounge to give away our first book?
Okay, so since I'm from Sweden, my question is, which distillery was the first malt whiskey distillery in modern times in Sweden?
We have a very knowledgeable crowd, Ingvar, and you're being very kind to them.
Wasn't it?
I think Mark has already kicked it out the park. A whiskey bond, Mark, has answered Macmira.
I see, yeah.
And a few others coming in, Macmira. Alan has suggested High Coast, which was once Box, right? But they are much more recent than Macmira. Your answer is Macmira, right?
It is.
Yeah. So Mark at Whiskey Bond, congratulations, my friend. I don't even think Ingvar has finished the question, and he typed that in. I'm going to try and make my question maybe just a smidge more tricky than that, to give away the second copy. But I'll need to take a piece of paper out to remind myself that this is going to Mark. He's local as well, so the postage is kind to me on that one as well. Mark Whiskey Bond. Congratulations, Mark, and well done. And Macmira are going from strength to strength as well.
I think so, absolutely. I mean, we have at least 4 distilleries in Sweden that are more or less exporting their whiskies. It's one thing to sell your whiskey in your own home market, but once in a while you realize that you have to go abroad, and then it's a tough market to compete with all the Scotch distilleries and Japanese and American. But Macmira is doing good. High Coast is doing good. Vane, I saw someone suggested Vane here. They were the second in Sweden. Smögen, small distillery.
Yeah.
4 good distilleries. Absolutely.
Yeah. And I think it takes a while for them to get into that point where they're able to reach back into older stocks to mix with their more vibrant, more fresh, or younger stuff to make something that starts to represent a real core identity for the distillery. It can take some time. But I have to say, I was trying to remember who gave me the tip-off for the special offer on this. This is not expensive. It's naturally presented from High Coast. Sorry, they're called High Coast now. Naturally presented, 46%, no chill filtration and natural colour. No age statement on it, but of course it's a young distillery. This was reasonably priced. If you bought this now, it would be in the mid-40s, but I picked this up at £34. And that was a tip-off from the community, said, hey, Roy, the Swedish whiskey is out there at this special. I grabbed it as well. I could get it. It's since gone up again. But you can see how much I'm enjoying that. I took this to Isla with me because sometimes you're just looking for something pure and clean and fresh. And if it's got some complexity and a bit of vibrance in there as well, this is a sweet, light whiskey, but it's remarkably well crafted for such a young thing. and I'm enjoying it very, very much. So I've forgotten who gave me that tip off. If you're in tonight, let me know and I'll thank you personally. But congratulations to Mark in picking that one up and answering for McMeera. So I'm going to ask you quickly then, Ingvar, what's your favourite of your homegrown distilleries? That must be hard for you to answer.
Okay, I can answer by saying that I love McMeera because they are really innovative. They do some fantastic finishes in casks that you never heard of, cherry wine or some apple cider and stuff like that. I love High Coast because they are extremely knowledgeable about how to make the new make, and they make tremendous whiskies. I love Smögen and because what he's doing there, Per, he's a lawyer actually, and he's doing this more on the side. He's doing some amazing peated whiskies. And Vejen, that's closest distillery to where I live, and I actually have a cottage on that island. And what Henrik Molin is doing there is amazing. So no, I couldn't pick a favorite, but these four are my favorite Swedish whiskies. Absolutely.
Fantastic. Graham Stewart is saying he had to chuckle. Mrs. just popped her head round the door and on the way to bed and said, "Is that some geeky Open University physics lecture you're watching?" Just say yes and say good night, Graham. Just say yes. Tell her that you'll be there soon. I hope you've got some headphones in, my friend. And Helen is saying, it's a never-ending task for Ingvar, but that's a good thing, as I'll keep this great book fresh and relevant. That's the thing about it being a yearbook. It comes and is continually updated. I think you said in a recent interview that you make a commitment to try and rewrite at least 70% of the content each year.
That's my goal, because I mean, if nothing happened let's go back to Inchgour. If nothing happened there in the last year, I will find a new angle to write something new about Inchgour for the next book. So absolutely, 70%, that's my goal.
That's where the passion comes in, Ingvar, because it doesn't matter, even if you've got to write about the kind of unsung Glenlossies, Inchgours, the Fettercairns, there's always whiskey provides us with so much more inspiration and ideas, and it's been around for so long. People keep asking me, when are you going to run out of ideas? And that could happen one day. Genuinely, it could happen. But I find whiskey is so full of things to talk about. Anytime you've been in whiskey company, you leave that company, you've not talked about the family, their history. You've only been spending all that time talking about whiskey.
Yeah.
And I find that a real dynamic. Cascode is asking, has Ingvar considered expanding the format by adding an extensive online version appendix? Now, you made a confession to me when we first talked about your appearance, right?
Yeah, I'm probably the most analog person you've ever met, Roy. So, I mean, me doing this is going out on my limb, and I love it. And I realized this year, I took part in the virtual whiskey show in London a week ago. Usually I go to London every year, launch my book there, meet people, have a dinner in a restaurant in the evening, go to a pub. So I had to do the virtual show now, and I had to do. I did. It sounds a bit crazy, but I really enjoyed it. But it's not my kind of thing, really. So I'll probably keep on doing books printed on paper for the next 5 or 6 years.
You can be forgiven for that, my friend. You can be forgiven. There's an explosion of things happening digitally. I think the key is to do what you discover that you are good at, and you can also have fun at doing as well. And I think the ability to keep rewriting that same thing over and over again and finding new angles is born of a passion, and clearly it must be something that you find fun, because I know how stressful it must be as well. Graham Fraser is saying, I wonder how easy it is to get updated information from distillers for the yearbook. Actually, what you're going to find is a significant chunk, I've not even got to any of these questions yet, of the questions from the community was a similar thing as well, talking about, let's say, changes in whiskey, and the administration of the book as well, just how you manage to keep it up to date year after year. You talked about your friend who told you about the Korean distillery, but you also mentioned a dynamic that must be very real for you, the fact that that friend moved from one place to another. So you must find it, how do you manage to put this together year after year?
Actually, I think the easiest thing is to keep the production side of things up to date, because I have very good relationships with most of the distillery managers in Scotland, and also abroad, but definitely in Scotland. And even if they move to another distillery, there comes in another one. But the problem can, from time to time, be to keep up with new releases, to get information, embargoed information about that before I publish, because more and more of the big producers, they rely on PR companies. So let's back up. 10 years ago, I had a very nice relationship with all the companies and their marketing departments. I could chat with them every time. And then all of a sudden, 5 years ago, it changed. Okay, Ingvar, you should have a talk with our PR company. And if you talk to a PR company, there you find a person who the year before maybe worked with cars or perfume or whatever. So they don't, and the next year they're gone. They're working with another consumer product. So they don't have the same passion, the same feeling about the product and the brand. So that makes it more difficult. But to keep track of the production side of things, that's never a problem, because, I mean, I know, for instance, the Diageo distillery managers, a lot of people ask me, how on earth can you get in contact with them? Because Diageo is a huge company. It's the biggest drinks company in the world. Because I've built this relationship over the past 15, 16 years, and I never ask them anything except about the production. I know there are people who, wow, now I have a contact with the distillery manager of Malta. I'll ask him about the next release. You should never do that.
No.
Never with the distillery manager, because that's not their department. So I keep my questions very limited to that particular person. I ask about the production, nothing else. So yeah, and it works.
Absolutely. So that's that answered, and I think that you must do a decent job of it, because I'm just going to point something out to you that I've already noticed. That, and I don't know if it was subject to embargo or anything, but on that image there, if you can see, there's at least one of those bottles, perhaps two, that were only released, I mean, actually released after this book was available publicly. The Ardnamurchan there is brand new, and it came out, certainly for us in Scotland, it came out after this book was published. So it is that bang up to date. There's a question later tonight as well that talks about a brand new release that I've not mentioned yet. And I opened to it, it's in here. It's in here. And in fact, the reason that it's in the quiz tonight is because I spotted that release was in the book. So it is pretty bang up to date when it comes out once a year. So I can appreciate how that might be tricky with new releases.
That particular, with Ardnamurchan, I mean, Alex Bruce is extremely, he's been working with Adelphi for many years now, and I've known him for many years, and he's very forthcoming, giving me information. And he told me that, well, Ingvar, we are going to release it in September, October, but I would love for you to have a picture of the bottle in the book. So we have a mock-up, and people who bought the bottle now realize that it's much lighter.
In color, yeah.
Compared to the one that you showed me just now in the book. And Alex said, yeah, no, it was a mock-up, and it looks like it's sherry, very heavily sherry. Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
it's lighter, yeah. And again, it's another good first release, £45, naturally presented as well, 5 years old. As we talked about it, I know. But yes, it is up to date. I'm going to bring in a couple of questions from patrons now, because these were really quite good. Che Francis is saying he's looking forward to the vPub, and he'd like to ask, when writing about distilleries that he particularly enjoy personally, how do you deal with biases that may come from that?
With biases?
So I know, because I asked you personally, do you have any favourite distilleries? And it's been asked.
Okay. Well, I do have some favorite distilleries. Hopefully that doesn't show in the book. I really hope so, because the book should be very objective. If I should spill the beans now and say, okay, I have one personal distillery, and I do love Glenmorangie, and we talked about that earlier, Roy.
Yes.
So I do. That's a distillery that rarely lets me down. I love the 10-year-old original. I love the 18-year-old, the wood finishes. Tonight, I'm enjoying the Tale of Cake.
The new release, yep.
Yeah, new
cask, yep.
Yeah, exactly. But when people ask me, what is your favorite whiskey? I can't say a favorite whiskey, but I can say a few distilleries. A couple of others come to mind. Clynelish, wonderful. Linkwood, I love Linkwood.
Yep. I think you've also got fondness for Deanston, Dalhuan.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I must add one thing. What I enjoy the most, it's not when I get the chance to try a very old whiskey, a 75-year-old Mortlach or whatever from Gordon MacPhail, which was a nice whiskey, absolutely. But what I enjoy the most is when a distillery that most whiskey enthusiasts didn't want to recommend to anyone earlier, all of a sudden transforms into beautiful whiskey.
Yes.
And let me mention a couple of examples. You have Loch Lomond and Glen Scotia.
Yes.
In the last few years, fantastic whiskey. And the thing is, they did a decent whiskey, a very good whiskey for many years, but they sold it way too young because of the former owner, Sandy Bullock. He wanted to sell it as a very young whiskey. So you have Edward Dower, for instance. In that case, it was, to be extremely honest, that was lousy spirit before Andrew Symington bought it.
Yeah.
So they didn't make good whiskey, but when Andrew Symington bought it, all of a sudden, and he brought in Ian Henderson from Lafroy, and the Edward Dowers that you drink today are so much better than the ones that you could buy 5 or 6 years ago.
Where he's been able to bring in the variation now is based on the whiskey he's making and the way he's maturing it in the cask, rather than trying to work with the crazy inconsistency that came from the old Edgedour days that we've all had bad experiences of, and it made us a wee bit shy of it. That's not existed at Edgedour for the last 20 years, I would say.
No,
I know that you and I have talked about transformations at places like Angus Dundee, at Glencadam, and Burn Stewart, and then Distell at Deanston, and Bunnahabhain and Tobermory, and all of these, because I think what happens is that at least a chunk of their market, they start to shift the focus towards single malt for single malt's sake, that's going to be sold to an enthusiast, and it's going to be enjoyed as a single malt. And I think when that change happens, so many people out in the industry that we have to thank for that. Even Glenmorangie, we don't talk enough as enthusiasts about Glenmorangie.
No, we don't, because it's one of the 4 or 5 big ones. We don't talk about Glenfiddich, Glenlivet, and Glenmorangie, or Macallan for that matter, and because that's not what whiskey enthusiasts talk about. We try to find these smaller, more obscure distilleries, but there are so many good whiskies to find also within these 4 big ones. And
well, I would agree with you fully. We've talked recently on vPubs, the value that we find in Diageo, the value that we find at Pernod Ricard and various places. When you talk about Glenmorangie, LVMH, Ardbeg 10 is naturally presented 10-year-old Islay whiskey for £50 and less. It's amazing that we have it. Now, I know that at Glenmorangie, Ardbeg, and Diageo and everybody often have very high expensive, higher profile things that make us a bit cynical, but their core range, Glenmorangie's 10-year-old is a beautiful 10-year-old. And back in 8 years ago, when everybody was ditching their age statements and moving to non-age statement, Glenmorangie stayed solid at 10 years old, and the price stayed solid as well. And then that foundation that they have, they build on with their Sauterne for their Nectar d'Or, their Sherry La Santa, their Port Quinta Ruban, and obviously the special editions that come out as well. I think they should be celebrated for that, especially when they up the presentation and they give us 46%, which allows them not to filter aggressively.
Absolutely.
All these wonderful things. And sorry, I just want to mention before this disappears, but Anthony, I'm going to struggle to pronounce your surname, my friend. It looks like Kozinski. Anthony Kozinski has just bought a dram from Poland. It looks like saying Slancha Ingvar, getting my Ardnamurchen soon too. Anthony, thank you very much for your virtual dram, my friend. Thank you.
Yes. I remember, Roy, you did a presentation of the flora and fauna bottlings. I saw it just now, a couple of weeks ago. I think it was 3 years ago you did it.
Yep.
I think it was an absolutely brilliant presentation of the whole range. And there we have it. These are 10, 12, sometimes up to 16-year-old whiskies. And I had a revisit to them at the virtual whiskey show with when Billy Abbott had a tasting, and I bought tasting packs from the Whiskey Exchange, and DHL, they managed to deliver them 1 hour before the tasting. So I took part in that. So I had a revisit to all these wonderful Glenlossie, Mannochmore, of course, enthusiasts love the Deluan and the 16-year-old and the 15-year-old Ben Rinnes. They are classics, but the other ones, really well-made whiskies. And the
Strathmill was the one that I remember when I was making that video. The Strathmill was bizarrely the one I was going back. Who'd buy Strathmill? Whoever sits with a glass of Strathmill, it's crazy. The thing that inspired that video actually was my wife bringing me a blind sample one night and asking me to guess what it was. And I went through my entire whiskey collection and I couldn't guess. And she said, it's a Glen Spey. And I said, Glen, I'd forgotten that Glen Spey even existed.
Most people do.
Yeah, absolutely. And yet Diageo brings it to us in a flora and fauna. Unfortunately, it's not internationally distributed. It's one of the things that we can maybe criticize for. It'd be a shame. And but it does tell you a tale about Diageo that they do more than perhaps they should be expected to do, because all of those distilleries exist as an ingredient for blending, essentially. The fact that we can enjoy them as a semi-official release, as a single malt, has to be applauded. But my point in that video, as you probably picked up, that just give us it just a little tiny bit better. But that's the enthusiast in me speaking as well, of course. So there you go. I don't think there's any bias appears in a Malt Whisky Yearbook. It's very objectively, very matter-of-factly written. There's actually, on that topic, there's a prickly question here from Tabitha as well. Semi kind of current as well, although it's kind of blown over now. The less we say about this, the better, honestly. But I'm going to ask this question, Ingvar. I guess it's up to me, Tabitha says, to address the elephant in the room with a question for Ingvar. Given that one of the other annual whiskey books has been featured in the media recently for the sexist language it used, what does he think about diversity in the whiskey world? And does he consider that what his audience is when he's writing the Malt Whisky Yearbook? And has his writing style changed to reflect that increasingly diverse audience for the book?
No, I don't think my writing style has changed, because in the same way that I don't like whiskey companies trying to launch a special whiskey for women. I mean, it's failed every time. I met so many, especially in Sweden, I mean, because this is where I live. I met so many women who had their first whiskey to be an Ardbeg or Lagavulin, and they were hooked.
Yeah.
And I met so many men who swear by, I don't want anything but smooth, nice whiskey that tastes of vanilla. I don't want anything peated.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it goes either way. So I don't see any reason why I should try to change my style of writing. My book is very objective, and I don't write for women. I don't write for men. in the same way that whiskey producers shouldn't try to produce a whiskey for women or a whiskey for a man. No.
I think there's an argument that it's good to celebrate women in whiskey, or celebrate women's movements, or celebrate any cause that is perhaps needing an extra bit of kind of injection of support or whatever. But I think you're right. If when you market something and you add gender when gender doesn't need to be a thing, it's a disaster. Why are we bringing gender into this? It's nonsense, you know. It's
but still, what I would like to add, and this is not about my book, it's about how many times how women are treated in the whiskey business. Sometimes by their peers, and sometimes by the audience at various whiskey shows. I've seen that many times, and that's despicable. I mean, I've seen it so many times. You go up to a stand, you see a guy go up to a stand, and he sees a woman in charge of it, and he spots a guy in the behind, and he says, "Could I talk to him? I have some specific questions about the whiskey." And he doesn't realize that this woman at the stand, she's the boss there. She knows so much more than the help that they hired, who just happens to be a man. So, I mean, that's terrible, and that has to change, absolutely. But it's not that I reflect in my book, but I see it all the time, and that's terrible.
I have to say, I've only just flicked through the first few pages of the 2021. And I haven't read all these articles, but there's plenty diversity in these pages. And I don't think I need to say any more than that. I know that it's perhaps not intentional. I know that it's incidental for you because you're putting an objective piece together. But I am absolutely reassured by reading your book year after year that it is exactly that. And you don't consider how people identify, how they look, eat, pray, or otherwise. We're all in it for whiskey, and we don't really care about the rest. And I think that's one of the luxuries that's afforded to us actually by whiskey. It is one of the wonderful things that it does, that it unites people that would probably not otherwise be friends or connections, and we're brought together by this kind of common love of this thing. And that when you do get together, not in 2020 obviously, but when you do get together, whiskey does find a way of bringing you together and then stepping back and letting you see the person and just connect with a person on a thing that you both love. And I think that's quite special because it doesn't really matter who they are and what they're about. Graham Fraser is saying, does Ingvar think the growth in Scotch whisky distilleries will lead to a bubble and that may ultimately burst? I have to say a similar question has been asked by a few of the patrons as well. People talking about changes in whiskey such as Christopher Torres, Matt Bishop and Drew Lane, and also speaking specifically about that kind of growth. I think also from Paul Gibbs and various other people. It's been a constant theme on vPubs and the content that I am interested in, because we're not just speaking about all the new distilleries that's coming along because the scale of these are very small, but the capacity that's been building from you making this yearbook year after year. You must see the established producers' capacity increasing. So we're seeing maturing stock increasing substantially, private casks increasing, sealed bottles in people's collections increasing. All that whiskey is not being opened and drunk. It's this whiskey is growing year by year. Is that one of the dynamics that you've witnessed yourself, and do you see it continuing, or what's your take on it?
I think there are two sides of that. I mean, first of all, there have been a lot of distilleries opening up, and as you say, Roy, many of them they have a capacity of 150, 200, 250,000 liters, and that's small. We have a few big ones that more like 12,000 liters, 12 million liters, etc. But the question is, will there be a whiskey loch like we witnessed in the late 70s, early 80s, and when in 83, I think was 11 or 12 distilleries that had to close? I don't think so, for two reasons. One is that the market is so much bigger today. At that time, Asia wasn't that important when it came to whiskey. The other thing is that we may have a huge capacity in Scotland, but they don't utilize all that capacity. I think the latest figure I had from the Scotch Whisky Industry Review was that 76% of the capacity is utilized.
Yeah.
So you have to realize that even though there are 400 million liters of capacity, they are not making 400 million liters. I mean, they're clever enough to realize that maybe we won't sell all that. So right now it's 75, 76% of the capacity that is being used. So
well, if we look at Macallan, went from about 8-9 to 15, but they have the ability to make a mirror image distillery. It's already in place there for them to duplicate that and double up again. We've seen Glenfiddich, massive. We don't even know what stage Glenfiddich is at because they're in constant state of flux. Glenlivet, 20 million plus litres, a doubling of capacity. Even in smaller distilleries like Ardbeg over in Islay, 1 to 2 million. We're seeing these huge leaps forward. So what you're speaking about, the point that you're making there, is that's theoretical flexibility that they have to increase capacity if they need to.
Yeah, exactly. So even if Glenlivet has expanded to 20 million liters, it doesn't mean that they're making 20 million liters every year. And also the important thing is that the market is so much bigger today than it was in the late 70s, early 80s. So I don't fear that there will be a whiskey loch. I would love for it to be a whiskey loch because we could really enjoy that. I mean, my God, we had so many fantastic whiskies to buy really cheap. For those of us who came into the whiskey business in the 1980s, 1990s, and the ones who started to take an interest in whiskey now, they ask about, what about this Glenmore and Banff, and what was that? Well, they're all gone. You can't taste them. But back in the late 90s, we could buy them for 50 quid.
I know, if hindsight had 20/20 vision, I know. There would have been a time that you would have been able to pick up the Port Ellens and the Broras and whatever as being coming in when you did. And it's kind of one of the things that I talk about on the channel as well, is that for the drinker, we can almost be ambivalent because it doesn't matter if it's market, if it's capacity, it doesn't matter what drives. We'll always work together as a community to find where the value is. And if it ends up coming back a little bit and swinging in the opposite direction, then for us as enthusiast drinkers and people who enjoy the whiskey, then we can be in a fairly safe position. But it's still very interesting to see, and what we don't want to see is boom and bust. We understand that there's going to be undulation, but wouldn't it be nice if we could, and I think it makes sense if we're increasing capacity to give us flexibility, to increase capacity when we see it's going to be there and be able to shrink it back down. And maybe because a lot of automation is involved, there's maybe less job losses and attrition through that happening. So that's an interesting take on it, actually.
Well, you had another angle of your question there, and it was about people collecting whiskies and not drinking it. That's an interesting topic. And I must say, I'm not very fond of people collecting whiskies and not drinking them. And I'm not fond of flipping whiskies. You buy a new single cask from Highland Park, and then within 2 hours, it's on eBay, and you're flipping it for double that money. And that's a trend that I absolutely hate. Whiskey is for drinking. So I can see the reason why Diageo all of a sudden a couple of years ago started to raise the prices of Brora and Port Ellen, because they saw that the whiskey that they produced and sold, a consumer could make double that money within 24 hours. So why shouldn't Diageo make that money? They produce the whiskey. Yeah. So this collecting and flipping, and it's not for me. Whiskey is for drinking.
I have to be very careful because I'm part of the problem often. I literally have built a channel based on whiskey evangelism. So if I evangelize about certain whiskies and they suddenly become harder to get a hold of, especially when it's small release stuff, then, I'm not saying that I directly affect the prices of anything or the availability of anything. But if I'm speaking in that way, I'm directly affecting that potential outcome to happen. And also, I think that some people spend a lot of time and they put a lot of risk into buying that whiskey and potentially trying to make money out of it. There are some very, very cynical flippers who are very black and white about it. And it's difficult as enthusiasts, people who want to just drink and share the whiskey. It's difficult to see that happening. But in life, it takes every type of character. And some people, and there are hybrids, of course. There are people who have collections and people who have collections of selections. And there are people who have, just like me, that what you see behind me is all sealed, but everything will be open at some point. A lot of these are my gift whiskies from the community and things. But eventually when it's opened, it ends up next door. And then my problem is I have far too much open, honestly. But what we end up with is selections of open whiskey. So you can end up in this kind of hybrid situation as well. It's an interesting topic. I'm going to go back to the questions before we digress too much and ask a couple more questions from patrons. And Ross Mashburn over in the States is saying, time to tell your flipping story. So I succumbed. I got an email from Macallan to say that I could enter a ballot, and I entered the ballot like I've entered other Macallan ballots in the past, thinking I would never hear anything. And I won this ballot. And it was more money than I'd ever spent on a bottle of whiskey for myself ever. But I honestly thought, well, you know what? If I don't open and drink this, I bet you I'm able to sell this and make something and maybe buy another bottle with the profit I'm making, and I can put my money back. I lost £100. So it tells you it wasn't fun for me. I didn't enjoy it. And it's not what I want to do. I may sell whiskey at auction in the future, but it'll be like once every few years or something like that, because I need to clear some space or something. That's the only time I've ever done it in the past. It's not something I get any pleasure from. So I don't have any intent to do it. And the amount of bottles that come through my hands, 99% of them I want to try. I want to taste the liquid. That's where the passions lie. Doc Macallan Fine and Rare over in Germany said, actually, he's talking about this very thing. Given your experience, Ingvar, what are your thoughts about the growing interest of investors in whiskey and the seemingly endless upward price trend? This was on the back of an article, actually, where whiskey had yet again outperformed gold and even things like Bitcoin. It's incredible.
I know, and I realized that I've never wanted to write about it in the Malt Whisky Yearbook because I don't like whiskey as an investment. But I realized that 2 years ago, I think it was in Malt Whisky Yearbook 2019, there was an article about investing in whiskey, because a lot of readers had contacted me saying, can't you do an article about that? And okay, you have to listen to readers. And so I commissioned that to, if it was probably Johnny McCormick, because he's very good at writing about that stuff. So he did a good article, but still, that issue is very sensitive for me, because I don't like investing in whiskey. I think it drives up the prices for a lot of consumers, and I don't care about the Dalmors selling for £100,000, and you get a small rifle and you get a book signed by Richard Patterson. I mean, I'm not talking about that, because that's for Russian oligarchs and rich Chinese businessmen. So that's not a problem for us. But when a single cask from Highland Park is released at, we have these fantastic whiskey shows at the boats going from Sweden to Finland.
Yes.
Yeah, amazing. Viking Line, fantastic. So when that single cask from Highland Park is released, and it costs around £150 on the boat, and people buy it and they flip it, and then the next day or the next hour it's £300 on eBay. So next time Highland Park, they want to release a single cask, it will cost £300. And the next time, £450. So it's increasing the prices for us ordinary consumers.
I agree. It would be nice if we could, and we're seeing this across the board. We can't one of the most frustrating things for Francis Cuthbert at Daft Mill is that he wanted to make his whiskey for people to drink it, and now it's become it's very, very, very difficult for us to buy any Daft Mill, honestly. We can see every Fisheel at Isla, different this year, of course, there wasn't one, but at Isla, people are picking up the Fisheel releases, and for the majority of them, they can be sold immediately after Fisheel for some significant money.
Yeah.
I just had a dram bought for me there by John Boxable. Thank you very much, John. A raise a wee glass of this sample. It's a very interesting sample. I wish I could share this with you, Ingvar, but this is from Shelter Point in Canada. But what's interesting about this is it's their Montfort 151. This was sent in to me by a barfly. I'm very grateful to have it as well. Oh, I had his note here. Here it is. Yep, both whiskies are 46% ABV, non-chill filtered, uncoloured NAS, and Montfort is triple distilled. But it's what's interesting about this is it uses 100% unmalted barley. So they must get that enzyme reaction from some other method, you know, the reason that we need that malting to happen in the first place. But it's obviously a single grain barley because it's a completely unmalted. And it's quite enjoyable. There is a slight hint of kind of almost chemically, I don't know, it's difficult to talk about off notes because it makes it seem unpleasant. But what it's doing, it's what it's telling me is that there is something about this that's telling me it's not Scotch, but it's very enjoyable. But I'll raise this glass to John Boxable and say thanks for your virtual dram. Cheers.
Exciting, very experimental. 100% unmalted barley. That's
yeah. And I'd mentioned it on a vPub when I discovered it, and somebody, one of the barflies, I wish I could remember who it was that sent me now. And I always say this, please, I say it to everybody, if you send me a sample, please write on the bottle, like here, this is a Girvan Pinot Noir cask from Cadenheads, but I've written on here Novak so I can remember this is from Stefan Novak. But please write on the wee sample bottle who it's from, so that as they sit here and I kind of forget about them and pick them up randomly, I can give you a wee mention. Whoever it was that sent me this, I'll try to give you a shout out in the future. Nick Stilton Massey has got too many good questions. Honestly, Nick asked a host of great questions. The first two I'm going to read out because they were quite good. But he's asking what your favourite distillery is that you've visited. And he's not asking about whiskey like Glenmorangie. He's saying, but the distillery itself and why. And he also asks which other writer has inspired you the most on your journey. So first up, your favourite distillery.
Speyside.
Wow.
I didn't see that coming.
I did not see that coming. So we have to ask why.
It's tiny. It took 25 or 30 years to build.
Yes.
So beautiful, situated just outside Kinusia, I think it is.
Yes.
And it's so fantastic with the water wheel and I love it. I love it. It's my favorite.
Do you know the amount of times that I've driven up the A9? My friend, the Whiskey Rev, lives in just north of Aviemore. And the amount of times I've driven up there, and we passed the Pitlochry distilleries, some Southern Highland distilleries and things. And obviously we passed Dilwhinnie. And I forget that distillery is even located there.
I know.
You've inspired me to make a stop.
Yeah.
It's a pretty place.
I've been there 3 or 4 times, and I absolutely love it. I think it's fantastic. And for the other questions, other writers who have inspired me, I already mentioned Michael Jackson. I bought his book in 1988, and I think it was revelation for me to read that. Charlie MacLean.
Yes.
Charlie MacLean. I tried to. I've told him so many times. He published his liquid history. I love history, all kinds of history, but whiskey history especially. And he published a liquid history in sometime in the late 1990s.
Yeah.
And I told him every time we meet, I tell him you have to write a new edition of that one, and because he stopped at that time, at late 90s. So we have to add another 20 years, of course. So everything that Charlie writes inspires me, absolutely. So
I love writing. I love reading Charlie's content as well. I love the way that he just makes everything so easy to consume, enjoyable, accessible, and writes about it with a really quite humorous whimsy. I really enjoy him, contemporary wine.
I forgot one. Dave Broom. Dave Broom, for God's sake. Every book that Dave writes is fantastic. The Whiskey Atlas, marvelous.
Yes, I have it here.
Especially one book, Whiskey, the Manual.
Oh, wow.
And if you just see the title of it, it seems like, okay, so now Dave Broom is going to tell us exactly how to drink a whiskey. And I hate that. I mean, how you drink a whiskey is up to you. And that's exactly what he's saying in his book. He's trying 100 whiskies, neat, with coconut water, with soda water, with Coca-Cola, with Japanese green tea, and with ginger ale. And then he comments on every blend, every mix. And that's when I realized that Lagavulin 16-year-old and Coca-Cola is fantastic.
Yes, I know.
That was thanks to Dave.
The smoky cokie, they call it, I know.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, Lagavulin 16 is still affordable enough for us to be able to do that with relative affordability. Yes, I've just had it pointed out to me that it's Peter Box, my friend Peter, that sent me these Shelter Point samples. He sent me the Montfort 151 and also the Shelter Point single malts as well. Peter, thank you so much. Of course, it was you. When I was setting up tonight, I remembered that it was you, but I just kind of said, oh, that's Peter. I never made a note of anything and then forgot live. I apologize, my friend. Thanks for being in tonight and thanks very much for your samples. I also want to say thank you very much to Hoyt, my friend Hoyt. Cheers to Ingvar. Just purchased the 2020 yearbook. Prep for your quizzes, Roy. Devour it, Hoyt. And then as soon as the 2021 arrives with you as well, pick up that one too. Anybody that's struggling to get it right now, I was going to ask you about this. Amazon have delayed. I've had messages in from people saying that Amazon have delayed anybody that's pre-ordered to December. I don't know if you know about that.
What?
Amazon have delayed the UK deliveries. Yeah, to December.
I mean, that's crazy because I sent 4 pallets to my distributor in the UK, and they are taking care of the deliveries to Amazon. So I'll have to check that tomorrow, because they earlier they said 28th of October.
Yes, I know. Next week, I know.
So if you can't buy it from Amazon, buy it from me.
That was my question. Right, so it's maltwhiskeyyearbook.com.
Yeah.
And you're shipping globally?
Yep.
You're shipping worldwide, and
yes.
Then it comes direct from Ingvar's warehouse.
Absolutely.
So there you go. So Hoyt, you can get it as well, and you'll be able to ship out to you guys in North America too. Wonderful stuff. Greg's Whiskey Guide is saying Ingvar, one author which isn't mentioned often and alas has passed away, Helen Arthur. Greg, you wouldn't believe it, but Ingvar actually brought Helen Arthur up. I don't think we were live. Was that before we went live? You mentioned Helen?
That was before we were live, yeah.
The single malt whiskey companion played an important role for me in my start years. Lindsay Holman is saying Amazon website currently says October 28th. I think people that have pre-ordered have had emails to say it's delayed. Maybe it's come back in again. Maybe it was just a temporary thing. Mark Slinger is saying, Roy, Amazon emailed me today to say delivery was brought forward and is now on its way to me. Okay. So there you go. It's just a hiccup at Amazon's side. Now, it wasn't just one person. There was a few people in the community. One of them was actually Vinnet No Nonsense Whiskey that had that very message. So it looks like Amazon's been able to sort it out. Steve Anderson is saying in the US, I don't even see the 2021 yearbook being available to pre-order. In that case, maltwhiskeyyearbook.com, Steve, and then you're ordering it direct from Ingvar and he can ship it to you. Whiskey Central is in. I realise that I've been pronouncing your name wrong. Not only was I getting it confused, but I believe that I've been saying Shyla, but it's Shayla. Shayla, I've just discovered that you're also putting out your own content as well. And I was thrilled to sit and watch some of the content that you're putting out. So Whiskey Central, she's been in the community for quite a while now, but she's creating her own content now as well. If anybody's interested, head over to Shayla's channel. She's doing a wee bit of live streaming as well. She's putting out video content as well, and it's her take on it. And I was charmed to watch some of the content, Sheila. I wish you the very, very best of luck with it. Doc McCallan Fine and Rare is, actually, Whiskey Central, Sheila is saying, can we buy an entire collection or just the last 5 years maybe? As Ingvar said, you can go all the way back to 2008, but you're going to have to fight with people to get the 2006 and 2007 early editions. I mentioned No Nonsense Whiskey. For as long as I've known him, he's been trying to find a 2006 edition, and he's not been able to find it. So, it's auction fodder now, Sheila, I'm afraid. McCallan Fine Rare Doc is saying, book arriving from Amazon next week on Thursday. And Andrew Pierce is saying, is it cheeky to ask Ingvar why it's cheaper on Amazon than it is direct? Is that not just the Amazon's thing, I guess?
Well, there's an easy, I get that question a lot, because Amazon, they can sell a book and they just have to make a 5% profit, because that's their whole business idea, because they work in volumes. If I'm going to make a living out of this, I need slightly more than 5%. Otherwise, my wife and my daughter wouldn't be too happy and I wouldn't have a car. So that's why if you buy it from me, it will be a bit more expensive. You will support a struggling author. And you could also, if you send me an email, I could sign it for you.
There you go.
That's fantastic.
A deal. And you will even sign it to a fellow barfly, which is very cool as well. So also, I think it's in a similar theme as why would you buy a bottle of whiskey from your local independent when it's £5 more expensive than it is from Amazon or from wherever kind of cheap place that you can get. And of course, there's arguments for it all. If it's easy for you to get it and it's a bit cheaper, fine, we understand why people mail order. But supporting your local retailer, can you imagine what it would be like if they were not there, if they didn't exist? Going in and having that environment to learn about different things, to take a conversation in a different way, to have a nice time. Or again, 2020 is an exception, we know. But that's why we pay. We don't mind paying a little bit extra to support our independent. And I would very much be in a real pickle if the Malt Whisky Yearbook disappeared, Ingvar. So I'm happy to pay the price direct that you're asking. So I don't want it to disappear. Simon Ray is saying, oops, Simon, sorry, it just jumped there. I had that exact same message from Amazon, so have ordered it direct. Whiskey Central is saying, thank you so much, Roy. I'm happy you've watched a video of mine. What I need to do, Sheila, and I'm very dismissive of it, if I'm watching something in the background as I'm kind of doing other things, I need to spend a moment and just leave a wee comment as well, so you know I've been there and watching you. Like, comment, all of those things mean so much to creators, Sheila, believe me. And I apologise. The next time I'm over at your channel, you'll know exactly which videos I'm tuning into. John Della Cuisine is saying, can definitely recommend Whiskey Central channel. Very entertaining and a lovely lady indeed. There you go. John Della Cuisine endorses Sheila's content. Absolutely. And honestly, the more the merrier. The more that comes out there, the more realistic a proposition YouTube becomes to share and enjoy whiskey content. And I celebrate all my peer creators out there. It's fantastic to see the platform growing as it is. Andrew Pierce is saying, thanks for answering. I have ordered direct. Everwind is in. Does Ingvar have any insight how the distilleries predict future sales after doing this for so long? What does the future hold based upon the past? That's in line with a lot of the patrons' questions as well. They're talking about changes in whiskey, similar to Everwind's theme there. For instance, Christopher Torres is asking, can you identify 2 or 3 of the biggest changes that you've witnessed over the whiskey scene since you started the yearbook? Maybe with a mention of which distillery you believe could be pushing the bar a little bit. Matt Bishop on a similar theme, but he also wants you to talk about a specific whiskey that you might have seen change over those let's say 15 years or whatever. We talk about whiskey changing. I think we should embrace the fact that whiskey does naturally change, but have you seen that happening in your own experience? And Drew Lane as well is also asked about the general changes, similar to Everwind's question there. What kind of trends and developments have you seen change? What have you appreciated and what have you found disconcerting? It's quite loaded, isn't it? But you've been doing it for 15 years now, right?
Yeah, it is. I mean, one huge change is the more and more producers their interest in malt whiskey. I mean, back 15 years ago, the likes of we mentioned Loch Lomond earlier. Let's say Tomatin, Tullibardine, or Glenmorangie. At that time, Glenmorangie was just the little sibling in the family of Ardbeg and Glenmorangie, and they didn't get any attention at all. And today it's been expanded, and they're selling. They have a huge range. Same with Loch Lomond, Tullibardine, Tomatin. So the producers have realized that there is a lot of money to be made in single malts. And if we look at it, we always say that 9 out of 10 bottles that are sold of Scotch whisky are blends. That's still true, but 30% of the money comes from single malt. And that's more important.
Yeah, the value, proportionally, the value is huge compared to blends.
Absolutely, absolutely.
And margin.
Yeah, and the producers have realized that. Other changes, there are negative changes as well. I've seen, especially in the travel retail business, the duty-free bottlings, that have developed more and more generic bottlings that taste very similar. I think the duty-free arena should be a fantastic chance for producers to show something different, something exciting, because here you can pick up something that you couldn't pick up in your local store. But instead of that, a lot of the producers are doing these very generic, lots of vanilla, same whiskies all over. That's a negative change.
And I have to say, they're going for duty-free because they're going for that maximum margin profitability. Everything is out at 40%. Everything is a gateway whiskey. Everything is it's pitched to entice new customers in, perhaps. That's all fine. We understand those things. But there's very little for people that are kind of looking for something, a bit of spice, a bit of interest. What you can find in duty-free is fantastic bottlings from the likes of Glen Scotia, one of the ones that you mentioned, actually, that's upping their game, and Loch Lomond. You're occasionally able to find these kind of much more naturally presented, much more interesting products. Again, 2020 being an exception for that, of course. I can imagine that duty-free is suffering hugely. But I agree with you fully. There was a time when I was getting into whiskey that duty-free was a wonderful candy shop for me, a sweet shop.
I know.
But now it's kind of, you just more often than not just pass through with a quick glance.
On the more positive side, you have a lot of producers doing some exciting work with for instance, rye, maturing in new types of cask, thanks to, I mean, the SWA changed the rules a year ago, so now you can see finishes in peculiar casks, like tequila cask, and I still can't understand why Glenmorangie couldn't do a finish in a cider cask. I mean, that's crazy. But there is more innovation now, which I really like.
That's interesting as well, and it's interesting. And I think that what that single question there has taught me that if you're up for it, Ingvar, I know that if you were here for another vPub at some point in the future, it would be easy for us to talk. But I know that I'm using up your time. It's very late in Sweden. I think you're planning to stay for the quiz.
I am.
But I'll read out one more question from patrons. There's a couple of drams come in. Jimmy Legg in Canada has bought me a dram to say, Ingvar, I can't tell you how much we appreciate all of the work you do in putting this reference together. Almost, Jimmy, I'm not going to read that second part out. I'll just say thank you very much, my friend, and not make me blush. But thanks, Jimmy. Thanks for your dram. Cheers. I'll scroll down to so-called Dram Tram. That's obviously going to be Matt and Cesar over in California, saying, just ordered my copy and I'm very much looking forward to it. Matt, you're going to devour it. I see the passion you have on your channel for whiskey, and you and Cesar together. This book, I can't believe that you've managed to get as far as you have without it, my friend. Feedback to me and tell me what you think about it. I am guilty occasionally of overselling. I am not overselling this book. Nothing I have said is a fabrication or I hope you do enjoy it. And he's saying, thanks to Roy and for having Ingvar on today. Cheers to you both. Cheers, Matt and Cesar. I hope you're both doing very well. Cheers. And Helen is saying, been another great vPub, Roy. Ingvar, been a great guest. Bravo and Slantia. Well, let me ask you one more question. There was one here that I thought would be a nice one to finish on, and it's Jimmy Legg's question. I'm looking for it. Where are you, Jimmy? Why can't I see the question? Are you telling me I'm going to... Oh, here it is. It's not Jimmy Legg. Jimmy Legg is his alias. He's down here as Blair, of course. That's why I couldn't find you, Jimmy. Can you ask him what is his biggest barrier to his production of the book each year? And then he goes on to say, maybe we can help him. What's the biggest challenge that you have with the yearbook? What is your biggest barrier you have to overcome every year?
I think my biggest challenge is to find out specific details about new distilleries in Asia.
Oh, wow.
That's very specific.
Yeah.
I mean, there are distilleries being built in Macau, in Mongolia, in China, in Singapore, in Myanmar. But it's so challenging to find out, are these really malt whiskey distilleries? I mean, you have to produce malt whiskey from barley to earn a place in the Malt Whisky Yearbook. And sometimes it's really difficult to find the information about them. So I need to help them.
If anyone can help with connections, contacts, information, otherwise to help remove the barrier of keeping the Asian section of the Malt Whisky Yearbook up to date, that's currently Ingvar's biggest headache. I can understand that exactly. Aren't there people here from these places? Occasionally, Jimmy, there are. What I'm noticing, and I'm really recently, I released the merch store online, and I started to. There's not much left there. It's been pretty much ram raided. I'm very, very grateful for all your amazing support. But what's amazing about that exercise is I'm very connected to you guys in the chat. I recognize the names. I know where you're from. I know your real names. I get to know you. But there's a bunch of other people. I see that Red Sox is in tonight. I've just learned recently that his name is Andrew. And all of this is through exchanges from people buying things from me. And I am shipping a bunch of stuff out to Asia. And I noticed that these people are not always engaged. Probably it's English as a second language is often a bit of a barrier for them, let's say. I'm not sure. But that's very reassuring for me to say. Actually, is saying, what an excellent guest. I have to say, Ingvar, I've very much enjoyed my time chatting to you as well. I know we could go on for hours, but thank you, Akshay. Thanks for recognizing how cool it was. I was very genuine at the opening here when I had sat next to you do you remember that masterclass?
Yeah.
It was Sukhinder who hosted it. We got to taste some amazing drams. There's one in particular I remember, but I'm not going to mention it because it's in the quiz. And I remember sitting next to you and I thought, wow, see if something happens with my channel, if I'm actually able to grow it to a stage where it's worthwhile, these people coming on and spending time. He would be a great guy to have on. So to reach out to you and for you to be just so open to the idea and welcoming Ingvar as well. Thank you so much. Just bought the 2021 yearbook from Ingvar. Could he please sign? Cheers, Ingvar, and thanks for being on the pub. That's Hoyt Hemphill. You'll recognize Hoyt because it's Hoyt, but it's spelt H-O-Y-E-T, Hoyt. Hoyt Hemphill in the States.
I'm writing it down. Can I just say, Roy, I mean, I'm so honored to be a part of this show. I mean, I've been reading the comments once in a while here, and my God, there are people from all over the world here. It's fantastic.
It's wonderful. It's wonderful.
It's amazing.
Yeah, it's the scale of it is amazing. The in terms of the size and the reach and how far it goes out. What is the most amazing thing is that everybody is in it together. Helpful, generous, knowledgeable, welcoming, kind, thoughtful. Even when they're clumsy and make mistakes or have agreements, it's fixed and it's in fun. I am blessed with the community that YouTube has given me. And I'm speaking about as a creator, as somebody that hosts, but also that somebody participates as a viewer as well. I can go into other channels and hang out with them and in the comments in the audience. It is an absolutely fabulous place to be. Whiskey demands it, I like to say. I've also had a dram from Graham Young in Canada saying, so glad for the guest. Ingvar's book is typically worn out by me each year, and I just got the 2021 from his site. Cheers. Cheers to you, Graham, as well. And Odd Johan Lundberg is in with a wee dram saying, keep it up. Thank you, Johan and Graham. Sláinte to you both.
Cheers.
Ingvar, let's get this quiz on the way. We're going to run over. It's the vPub. I apologise. I didn't want to rush things tonight. I was very much enjoying chatting to Ingvar. So we are going to be running a wee bit over. I apologise, but thank you all for staying. If you want to stay and enjoy the quiz, the quiz at the end, the vPub has so much of that quiz. Like I said, I was probably estimating it when I said 50% of the questions are from your yearbook. I would say that it's much more than that, because even if it's not created from the yearbook, I'll go back to the yearbook as a source to verify if the question is somewhat accurate or not. Okay. Jimmy likes but another drama. It brings a tear to my eye to hear Ingvar recognise the greatness of these people. Thanks, Ingvar. Don't get me emotional, Jimmy. Thank you very much. Cheers, Jimmy. Cheers. Jimmy is one of our greatest. I'm going to do a quick screen share now. Whiskey Central Shayla has bought me a dram. We are blessed to have you and Ingvar Roy. They are beautiful people. Cheers, Shayla. Cheers to you. I'll pull up this, and talking of beautiful people, here's one of my beautiful friends out in Norway, and he dropped this in the Aquavitae Facebook, not the Water of Life Facebook page, but the Facebook page that's grown up around the vPub. That's the Aquavitae Barflies page. This guy created that page 2 years ago, back in 2018, when we were trying to organize real live events where we could realize the virtual world in a real space. And eventually I took it from this guy and I changed it into the Aquavitae Barflies page, and it's getting on for 500 members now. It's got a nice little vibe going over there, still as polite and as welcoming as this lounge is. So if you're interested in joining Aquavitae Barflies page, just search Facebook for that. And I'll share this picture of Rolf getting ready for the vPub tonight. He shared it in the Barflies page. On the left, we see Rolf, of course, but on the right, we see his friend Wilson. He's in lockdown. So Rolf is known as Ebhead, and that orange thing you see there is Eb in Norwegian, I think is pillow, is Rolf's famous Ebhead that we all know about, wearing the Scotch Test Dummies Love the Pete hoodie. And he's got a fantastic looking long row 17-year-old single cast, which I'm a wee bit jealous about, Rolf. But that was a fantastic picture that you shared with us tonight. And I thought, I'm sharing that with the Barflies. I want them to see it. Well done. Ingvar, I don't know if you've taken any of these quizzes before, have you?
I haven't, no.
I tend to say tonight it's an easy quiz, but obviously it very rarely is. It's becoming quite rare for people to get 10 out of 10, and you'll see why. Occasionally these questions they like to either be banana skins or asshat questions. But there's always a purpose to them. They're multiple choice. So even the difficult asshat questions, you've got a 1 in 3 chance of getting, and you're only keeping your own score. The pass mark tends to be 5 out of 10, but you're Ingvar Ronde. Every single question in here tonight, bar I think one, has been inspired by your 2021 Malt Whisky Yearbook.
Okay.
So it'll be interesting to see how our lounge scores against you tonight, my friend. Best of luck as we roll into question 1 and ask, who very recently, added a core range natural cask strength version? It's 63.3% at £55. This was a surprise to me. I was very intrigued. Is it A, Glenturret, B, Jura, or C, Highland Park? No age statement, but it's naturally presented. We know that it's unchill filtered. They tell us. They don't put it on the label, I don't think, but they do tell us that it's unchill filtered.
Okay, so it's up to me now.
Well, I'll ask you in a second. All the answers are coming in. They're very knowledgeable chat. They have it. You tell me, Ingvar, which one you think it is.
I would say Highland Park.
Absolutely. Highland Park recently released a cask strength version. I've got a picture of it here, 63.3%. I find this bottling to be a bit over fancy. But I'll forgive the packaging. I don't mind that if it's about the liquid. And I'm curious to reconnect a wee bit with Highland Park. And I think for a cask strength, the price is pitched well. I know that there's going to be some young whiskey in there, of course, but 63.3%, there's going to be lots of flexibility in there. And it's going to give us a reasonably affordable way to connect with Highland Park in ways that we haven't been able to without spending a lot of money in recent years. Absolutely, Ingvar, you got it right. Question 2, Locks single malt, first released in 1992, is from where? A, Ireland, B, Scotland, or C, Canada? Where is Locks single malt from? It's first released in 1992. It's no longer available. You can't buy it now, I don't believe.
Okay, should I wait for answers to come in, or?
I'm being reminded as well to remember about the second book question. Yes, I've got a second book to give away. Steve A, thank you very, very much for reminding me. He's one of my moderators and keeping me right on track. I do need to remember that. Go right ahead, Ingvar. You obviously know this.
Okay, it's Ireland.
Absolutely, it's Ireland. It was the first single malt from what's now known as the Cooley Distillery, released way back then by John Teeling. And Jimmy is saying he wish he could take Highland Park back and send them back 15 years. Jimmy, I wonder how much Highland Park has changed and how much you've changed. Because I guarantee you that it's probably a bit of both. Well done, Ingvar. There's a picture of one of the special editions from Locks, Irish whiskey. Question 3, Ardnamurchan recently released their first malt whiskey. We talked about it tonight. But which of these also released their first in 2020? A, Torrovec on Skye, B, Nicknane in the Western Highlands, or C, Strathearn in the Southern Highlands? Now, it may be that you have tried these distilleries, but specifically the question is, which of these also released their first in 2020? The chat is moving very fast. Thank you all so much for your attendance and staying till the end. It was still up at 230 of you in for the quiz at the end. That's superb support. It's wonderful to have you here. Do you know this one, Ingvar? Are you feeling confident?
Absolutely. It's Knocknean. Great whiskey from Annabel Thomas.
I missed the boat on that. It was one that passed me by. I hope to still be able to connect with it and get it from somewhere, at least a sample. Because I'm very curious to try it as well. I love the philosophy. I love the way it was priced, honestly, less than £50 as well. Wonderful stuff, and I wish them all the very, very best. Well done, Ingvar, 3 out of 3 so far. Superb. Okay. Bowmore competes with which other Islay distillery for the second best-selling Islay after Laphroaig? So we all know that Laphroaig globally is the best-selling Islay whiskey. Second is a bit grey-er. It's a bit of a competition there. So who does Bowmore compete with? A, Lagavulin, B, Bunnahabhain, or C, Bruichladdich? Kilted Moose Scott managed to get one. He's saying, I'll sort you out with a sample. Thank you very much, my friend. I've just sent a package across to you today, actually. Jimmy Legg is saying, isn't it cool to think there are 230 people in your house sharing drams? Aye, absolutely. That is very cool, Jimmy. Andrew Butler is saying Nicknane are taking pre-orders for batch 2. Wow, that's good information. I would be curious, Andrew. Thanks for that. Andrew, you're one of the most knowledgeable, up-to-date guys. Very interesting. You're always very on point with your comments. Okay, go right ahead. Ingvar, you obviously know this as well.
Yeah, it's been a battle between Bowmore and Lagavulin for the past 5 or 6 years, so it's Lagavulin.
Absolutely. So if you answered A for Lagavulin, give yourself a point. You're up against it tonight with Ingvar. Obviously, he's got the home advantage, of course, but he's 4 for 4 so far. And I could see that most of you must be scoring pretty well tonight as well. You're 4 for 4. Perhaps the easy questions are coming to an end. Not quite. I'm going to show you a picture of a distillery here. And I'm only just going to ask, where is this distillery located? So you need to know what it is and therefore work out where it's located. Is it in A, Speyside, B, the Northern Highlands, or C, the Southern Highlands? So you need to know what distillery we're looking at, and you need to know where it's located. Now, this picture is not taken from the Malt Whisky Yearbook, but there are comments in the yearbook that made me include this image tonight. Question 5 at the halfway point is always a picture. And Jimmy Legg is saying, Aquavitae, we've all read the same book. And Kresimir is expressing his anger at the picture question. He really doesn't like the picture questions. There tends to only be one in there, Kresimir. Stick with it, my friend, don't worry. And Steve A. Oh no, he's just putting I thought you were suggesting this is an ASHAT question. We've not got to the ASHAT questions yet. I think this is fair enough. Ingvar, tell us, which distillery are we looking at here? Oops, I've lost my friend. I've lost video and connection for Ingvar. Perhaps his meter has ran empty. Hopefully he'll have the ability to drop back in again and click through on the same link. Maybe it's the battery on the laptop. Anyway, so Matt is saying, I think Ingvar is going to win himself a copy of his own book. Well, not if he's not in, not if he's had to disappear. Anyway, I can see everybody seems to think that it's a Speyside distillery. And of course, you're all absolutely spot on. It's one of the most obvious ones. It sits right on the main road there. And it's definitely one of the most unique buildings in terms of a distillery in Scotch whisky. It's Tormore. We're looking at Tormore in Speyside. So that's us at the halfway point. Let's see how the scores are doing for all of you guys. Orange Wheel Rule, good to see you in for a friend, 5 out of 5. Simon Ray, 5. Chuck Malt Minion is on 5 as well. John Della Cuisine, 5. Thomas Elmer, 5. Alan McLaughlin, 5. Gareth Thomason is on 4. Andrew Pierce, 5. George O'Brien, 4. Good to see you, George. Good to see you. Good to see you. Thomas Elmer as well. See, sometimes you're in as Thomas Elmer and sometimes you're in as Ross Fudd. Peter Box on 5. Scoring is doing very, very well. So many of you have already reached the pass mark. And Alan is saying he actually knew all of these for once. No guesses so far. Fantastic as we go on to question. Oh, he's managed to come back in.
Okay. Oh, okay, fine. Sorry about that.
Your battery die?
Yeah, it did. It did.
There you go. Whiskey Bond Marcus just bought me a dram to say cheers, Roy, and Ingvar's ghost. No, he's fully back with us now. He's working fine. Now, of course, you would have known that that was Tormore and it was a Speyside distillery, Ingvar, because that was inspired by you talking about the uniqueness of that building in your latest book. Okay, question 6. So many of them are 5 out of 5. There's going to be high scores tonight, potentially, but this is a bit of an asshat question, I'll admit it. Of the 126 Scotch malt distilleries listed in the latest yearbook, how many are Glens? A, less than the number of malt distilleries owned by Diageo. B, the same as the number of malt distilleries is owned by Diageo. Or C, more than malt distilleries owned by Diageo. So you can see that even although this question has been drawn from Ingvar's book, I'm actually challenging him to answer the question as well.
Oh.
How many Glens do we actually have?
Well, the only thing I can say that Diageo, they have 28 distilleries.
They do, if you include Rosanel. Well, of course, we're just malt distilleries. They have 28. That's right.
Yeah, exactly. That's a tricky one. Okay, I would go for less. A.
The majority of the lounge, or knowledgeable crowd, have actually seemed to have gone for C to suggest that there are more Glens than distilleries owned by Diageo. I can tell you that there are 26 Glens if we include Glenwivis being the new distillery. So even if we include Glenwivis, it's 26 versus 28 for Diageo. Ingvar, you're absolutely spot on. Diageo owns more distilleries in their portfolio than there are Glens in the Scotch whisky landscape right now. The reason that asshat question is in there is to kind of, we know that there are lots of, it's almost like like a stereotype that there are just so many Glens. But just to give an idea of the scale of Diageo, right? 28 distilleries. Question 7. Millstone is a range of whiskies produced at which distillery? A. Judam Distillers, I think I'm pronouncing that right. B. St. Killian, or C. Filliers. Now, I can tell you that Judam is in Belgium. No, Judam is in the Netherlands. I can tell you that St. Killian is in Germany and Filliers is in Belgium. One of those distilleries produce a range of products called Millstone, and I'll tell you that they had a legendary product that sold out, and people talked about it and talked about it and talked about it, and you could only hear stories about it. You couldn't taste it. But that masterclass I was in, hosted by Sukhinder Singh, that I sat next to Ingvar back in 2018, we got to try that particular legendary Millstone. But who made it? Judam in the Netherlands, St. Killian in Germany, or Filliers in Belgium. You're going to be 7 out of 7, Ingvar. I know that you know this, as does most of the lounge tonight. Most of the barflies have this as well. Give us the answer.
I think they're good. It's A, absolutely, Sudam.
Absolutely. Let me hear how you pronounce that.
Sudam.
Okay, I wasn't too far away then.
I'm not Dutch, so I don't know. You should ask Patrick, who makes it.
I trust you to pronounce it better than me. I was corrected on it before, but as long as we get close, nobody's gonna judge us too much for getting it a wee bit wrong. Okay, question 8. Which distillery occasionally releases under the Pagoda series for 5-figure sums? Who releases high-end whiskey? To use Ingvar's reference from earlier, oligarch whiskey, perhaps. Is it A, the Macallan, B, the Dalmore, or C, Glenfarclas? Which of those distilleries release high-end whiskey under the Pagoda series? It might help if I tell you that the word pagoda has a relevance in there. I think this could be a bit of a banana skin for the lounge. Jean de la Cuisine is saying, I need to get some Millstone. It is quite close to where I live. You do indeed. It's very highly celebrated. Kresimir is saying, if Ingvar goes for 10 out of 10, he has to assemble the quiz. One of the there's no prizes in the quiz at the end, Ingvar. So, but if you score 10 out of 10, if you get a full house, you have the ability to contribute questions for future quizzes.
Great.
Neil Cochran is saying questions over question 6. Answer. I'm not sure what question 6 was. Sorry, Neil. Let me cover that a wee bit later. Did I make a mistake? What do you think? Who released the Pagoda series, Ingvar? Hello, Ingvar?
Glenfarclas. Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, you froze there for a second at my end. Absolutely, it was Glenfarclas.
Yeah.
And I've got a wee picture here to show you here. Quite ornate little bottles. I think there's some kind of jewel, encrusted jewels thing going on here as well. This is super expensive. But what's interesting, and the reason that they call it Pagoda series, is that all of the malt that's included in this series comes from when Glenfarclas had their own floor maltings. So they would have actually been using their own kiln and their own pagoda. So it's 1972 and previous. But honestly, maybe Ingvar has had the ability to try 1 or 2 of these drams in his time. I certainly have not had the pleasure. Never. Super expensive, super rare whiskey. Second from last question, the Whiskey Rant podcast. This will be tricky for you, Ingvar. This might be your banana skin. Is a new collaborative video podcast series hosted by Sipper Social Club and which other YouTube channel creator? A, Whiskey Whistle in Winnipeg, B, Malt Reviews in the States, or C, Whiskey in the Six, he's in Toronto. So I think, Ingvar, unless you've ended up down the YouTube rabbit hole in recent weeks, that potentially I'm going to be asking you to guess this one.
Okay, so I'll go for B, malt reviews.
Mike and Narby at Malt Reviews in the States. Mark at Whiskey Whistle in Winnipeg, or Rob at Whiskey in the Six in Toronto. It's actually Rob. Rob and Jeremy at Sipper Social Club live close enough together for the two of them to be able to get together over a table. And I quite enjoy this. They call it Whiskey Rant, but there's not much ranting goes on in terms of they don't physically rant at the camera. They just have this really easy, flat conversation. There's nothing created here for visual. You can see it's just side on. And the reason for that is that it is designed to be a podcast. So I can listen to this in the background as I'm doing other things, and I'm really enjoying this new take. It's great that they're doing it on video there as well. You can tune in on video and watch it on their various channels, but they're putting out the Whiskey Rant podcast on YouTube, but you can also get it through your normal podcast providers. And enjoying what they're talking about. They've obviously got some special editions on the table there. They talked about Macallan's edition number 6. This year's Cartius from Lefroy. Ardbeg Black is on there. And Jeremy's pulled out another older Cartius to compare it to. Petehead Frank is saying about pronunciation, Sudam. When Ingvar pronounces Norwegian city of Haugesund, the ow is the same sound as the UI in Sudam. Yeah, Frank, thanks very much for helping us and keeping it right. And Skilded Moose Scott has said, I've already, one of the reasons that I popped this in today is that Rob, the guy on the left-hand side there, it's his birthday today. So let's raise a wee glass to the class and the gentleman that is Rob over at Whiskey in the Six in Canada. Happy birthday, buddy. Many happy returns, my friend. I know I've said it to you privately, but I'll say it to you from the vPub as well. Happy birthday, Rob. Cheers. Ralphie rants are the best, says Jean de la Cuisine. Don't we love an occasional Ralphie rant? Okay, let's see how the scores are doing. We've got Graham Young on 9 out of 9. I'm just going to try and dial in on the 9 out of 9s tonight. There's going to be a few of you, I think. Graham Fraser's celebrating on 7 out of 9, still a great score. Andrew Butler, fingers crossed on 9 out of 9. Sid Martin, 9 out of 9. Wow, there's going to surely be a 10 out of 10 tonight. Unless, have I saved the ultimate ask that question till the last? And indeed, I may have. Which of the Scotch whisky blends do not appear in the top 30 global bestsellers? So one of the great things about the Malt Whisky Yearbook is the stats at the end, and it lists the top 30 global bestsellers. But I'm going to show you 3 blends. One of these do not appear in the top 30 list. Is that A, Black and White? Is that B, Bell's? Or is it C, Label 5? My wife is phoning. I hope it's a butt dial. Hello? I'm live. Hello? Yeah, I'm live. Yes. Bye. She's obviously, I know that I'm running late tonight, so she probably assumed that I'd finished. That's excellent. My wife calling in. Do you know this one, Ingvar, or would you have to be guessing?
Yeah, I probably will be guessing between B and C. I'm not. I know Label 5. They've lost sales volume in the last couple of years. So, but Bell's, they're in a tricky spot as well. Black and White definitely is amongst the top 30, I think. So I would say. I'm trying not to look to the right at the comments. I don't want to get influenced by anyone here. So
I'm not sure they're very confident about this. Don't worry.
Okay. So I'll probably say Label 5, C.
Okay. And you're on 9 out of 9 so far, aren't you?
No, 8 out of 9.
Oh, which one did you?
The one,
of course.
Whiskey Whistle.
Yeah. Yes, the YouTube one, of course. Of course.
Yeah, of course.
Well, your final score for the night is 8, Ingvar. I can tell you that Bell's.
What Bell's?
Bell's. Now, that was amazing to me because Bell's is one of the most... Bell's has been with me for as long as I can remember that whiskey has existed. From a child, it was a brand that would have been around. It would have been a house. And being from Perth, I was originally from Perth. Bell's was just always around us.
Yeah.
So there you go. If you answered B for Bell's, let's see if anybody managed to get, let's take this out. Let's see if anybody managed to get... Sid Martin got his 10 tonight. Well done, Sid. Anybody else managed? I'm looking for Graham Young and Andrew Butler, amongst others. Any other 10 out of 10s tonight? Chris is saying 9 out of 10. Beat Ingvar.
I saw that, yeah.
I have it on my epitaph. And Tony Evans is angry, saying that the 9 out of 10, the asshat got me. Jean de la Cuisine is saying my dad would always have bells in the house to give my uncles to mix with Coke. Absolutely. He kept the good stuff for himself. Canny uncle that you have. Graham Young managed to get his 10 out of 10. I'm looking for Andrew just to see if he managed to squeeze his 10 out of 10 as well, but he might have slipped up at the end. If you did manage to score 10 out of 10 tonight, Alan McLaughlin managed it, my very first. Well done, Alan. Tremendous score. I have to say, I was pitching some easy ones in tonight, but I hoped that there would be some challenges in there as well. I hope you all had a bit of fun with that. Ingvar, I've had a lot of fun tonight. I've had an absolute blast hanging out with you and all the barflies tonight. I'm going to say goodbye to you now. Stay on till the end, and after we kill the live and things, I'll raise a wee glass to thank you personally. If you can stay up, I know you're an hour ahead of us. I know how late it is. It's
absolutely
already
no problem. It's been fantastic to be a part of this. Absolutely.
I hope that you would enjoy it. I had a feeling that you might. I'm very grateful to have you on board as a barfly now and watching the content as well. I would very much encourage you to enjoy so much of the wonderful content that goes out there on YouTube as well, Ingvar, if time permits and mood permits. What YouTube is a wonderful place to just, for community, getting together and sharing whiskey. It's been an absolute pleasure for me to be doing this on the vPub, and a real privilege to have you joining us tonight, my friend. Ingvar, thank you so much. I wish you all the very best with the yearbook going forward. Please, if you ever think that we can do anything to help or whatever, reach out to us. And thank you so much for helping fuel this wee thing that I do in this corner of YouTube. Thank you, my friend.
Cheers, my friend. Cheers.
If anybody's got any questions for Ingvar, please leave it in the comments under this video, not in the live stream. Put it under in the comments below, and I'll encourage Ingvar to come back in with a wee link and answer some of the questions if he can. Also, if any of you have got good wishes for our friend out in the States, Dwayne Large out in Indiana, who's struggling right now, any good wishes that you want to send along Dwayne's way, either send me a direct message or leave a comment down below in the video. I know that his sister is picking up the comments and good wishes from what Dwayne found a tremendous comfort in the whiskey community. And I really wish him the very best and a speedy recovery going forward. I've had a wee last minute drama in from my friend Alan McLaughlin saying, thanks, Roy. And Ingvar, Alan, I sent you a wee package today as well. It's on its way to you. Odd Johan Lundberg has bought me a dram as well. That's the second one tonight. Thank you both, Johan. Thank you, Alan. Cheers to you both. An absolute privilege and a pleasure to have Ingvar on tonight. It was fantastic, and I'm so glad that so many of you got some fun and pleasure out of it as well. I'll be back a week from now for another vPub. I'll be I'm trying to entice Roddy Graham back on. I know that so many of you have been asking what's happened to Roddy. Is he coming back on again? He definitely is. Roddy's a busy guy. He's very, very focused on the whiskey things that are happening generally out there. The Good Spirits Company, various clubs and tastings and events, the Glasgow Whisky Club, and so many more. So he can be busy, but he's more than willing to come back on. And it's maybe either going to be next week or 3 weeks from now. There's a couple of dates that we've scheduled in. We've locked in what the topic is going to be, and I'm really looking forward to having Roddy back on. Terry Dolan has bought me a dram. Terry, you star, I've managed to remember your dram tonight. I didn't pick up. I missed the last one. Thank you so much, my friend. Nice to have Terry in from Northern Ireland. Our friend Terry. Cheers, buddy. Also, I've reached out to Aaron. Through a conversation with Andy Bell, I asked if James McTaggart would be willing to come on. Because Aaron are not the new guys anymore. Aaron were one of the first of the new distilleries back in 1995. And I've got some very, very interesting kind of takes and angles on that and the dynamics of all of that. But I think it's nice to mark that and celebrate that, especially when Aaron are one of the distilleries out there that's bringing us as enthusiasts the presentation that we love and the pricing that we love as well. I think Aaron should be celebrated, and I would like to welcome James McTaggart on in a future vPub. I think that is going to happen. The date is locked in now for early October, so 2 weeks from now will be James McTaggart. And I hope, if we can make it work, Andy Bell will come on and join us as well, a great guy. I would like to welcome you all back here again next week and 2 weeks from now, and whenever the mood and the time suits you. If you can't make it live, please pick it up on the replay. But it's always an absolute blast to have you in. I'm going to pour another wee sip of this Cadenhead's Girvan 9-year-old Pinot Noir cask from Stefan Novak to raise this glass and say thank you all, you beautiful whiskey folk and dedicated barflies. You're very dearly loved. Jimmy Legs bought me another dram saying I'll contribute $5 to the Get Roddy Back on the Show fund. There you go, Roddy. How much more convincing do you need that we've been missing you and we're looking forward to you coming back? Thank you, Jimmy Leg, for your virtual dram as well. Oh, you beautiful whiskey folk and dedicated barflies, as I say, you are very dearly loved, and I look forward to seeing you all a week from now. Slán